I'm 82 years old. I've buried friends, I've watched my hair go gray and my hands go weak, but nothing, and I mean nothing, hit me harder than 4 words my wife said to me on a Tuesday afternoon in our kitchen. 4 words that made me realize I had spent over 50 years being a fool. And what I did next? Most people my age wouldn't have the nerve, but I did.
My name is Walter. And before you think this is just some sad old man story, stick with me. Because this is about betrayal, hidden money, a family torn apart, and one very old man who decided it was finally time to stop being quiet. I grew up in a small town in Ohio. Nothing fancy. My father worked at a steel plant. My mother cleaned houses on the weekends. We didn't have much, but we had dignity. I learned early that a man takes care of his family. Period. No excuses. No complaints. You put your head down and you work. And that's exactly what I did. At 22, I got a job at a manufacturing company in Columbus. Started on the floor sweeping metal shavings. Within 10 years, I was running 2 departments. Within 20, I was a plant manager. I wasn't rich, but I was steady. Reliable. The kind of man people counted on. And in 1971 I met Linda. She was 24. Beautiful. Quick to laugh. She had this energy about her, like the whole room brightened when she walked in. I was gone from the moment I saw her. We got married 6 months later. Now, I want to be honest here. Our marriage wasn't perfect. No marriage is. But for the first 15, maybe 20 years, we were a team. We built a life together. Bought a house. Had 2 kids, our son, Gary, and our daughter, Carol. I coached Little League. Linda ran the PTA. We took road trips every summer. It wasn't glamorous. But it was ours. Then something shifted. I didn't notice it right away. That's the thing about slow change. You don't see it happening until you're already buried in it. The shift started around 1995. Gary had just left for college. Carol was still in high school. Linda started spending more time with her sister, Diane. Now, I never had a problem with Diane. But Diane had a lifestyle that was different from ours. Diane's husband had made a lot of money in real estate. They had a big house in a nice suburb. Vacations to Europe. New cars every 2 years. And the more time Linda spent with Diane, the more restless she seemed at home. She started making comments. Little ones at first. Diane's kitchen has marble counters now. Isn't that something? Richard got Diane a new car for their anniversary. Just because. Don't you think we should have more by now, Walter? I tried not to let it bother me. I reminded myself that we had a paid-off house. College funds for both kids. Retirement savings. We were doing fine. But fine wasn't enough for Linda anymore. The requests started coming. She wanted to renovate the kitchen. I agreed, within budget. She wanted a new car. I agreed, used, certified pre-owned. She wanted to join the country club Diane belonged to. I said we couldn't afford the membership fees. That one started a fight that lasted 3 days. And somewhere in that fight, something cracked between us. I told myself it would heal. It didn't. Over the next several years, I noticed Linda pulling away from me, emotionally, socially, in every way. She stopped asking about my day. Stopped sitting with me in the evenings. Started making plans with Diane or her other friends without mentioning it to me until the last minute. I threw myself into work. Then into retirement projects when I eventually stepped down at 68. I built birdhouses. I tended a garden. I drove to my old buddy Frank's house every Thursday for coffee and cards. Frank was my one real friend at that point. He'd been married 40 years, lost his wife to cancer, and he had this quiet wisdom about him that I appreciated. I didn't tell Frank everything. I was too proud for that. But he knew something was off. He'd look at me over his coffee cup and say, "You doing all right, Walt?" And I'd nod and say, "I'm fine." I said that a lot. I was not fine. Here's what I didn't know, what I wouldn't find out until much later. While I was tending my garden and building birdhouses and pretending everything was okay, Linda had been talking to Gary. A lot. Now, Gary turned out different than I hoped. That's hard to say about your own son. But it's true. He was charming, good-looking, smart enough. But Gary had always wanted the easy road. He changed jobs 6 or 7 times. Borrowed money from us twice, once in his 30s, once in his 40s, and never fully paid either back. His wife, Tiffany, was cut from the same cloth. Nice enough to your face. Always had an angle behind your back. And I slowly realized that Gary and Tiffany had been spending a lot of time with Linda. Dinners I wasn't invited to. Shopping trips. Weekend visits when I was out with Frank or working in the yard. I brought it up to Linda once. She said I was being paranoid. She said Gary just felt more comfortable talking to her. That I was too hard to talk to. That I had always been emotionally unavailable. Those words stung. Because I had given everything to that family, every overtime hour, every skipped vacation, every time I said no to something I wanted so the kids could have what they needed. Emotionally unavailable. I turned it over in my head for weeks. Maybe she was right. Maybe I had been too focused on providing and not enough on just being there. So I tried. I asked Gary to come over for dinner. He came once, seemed distracted, left early. I tried talking to Linda more. She'd give me one-word answers and go back to her phone. I suggested we take a trip together, just the two of us. Like the old days. She said she'd think about it. She never brought it up again. I was 79 years old, sitting in a house I'd paid for, feeling like a stranger in my own life, and then came the Tuesday. It was an ordinary afternoon. I'd been outside pulling weeds. Linda was in the kitchen on the phone. I could hear her talking as I came through the back door. I wasn't trying to eavesdrop. I just came in for a glass of water. But I stopped when I heard her say Gary's name. I stood there in the doorway, muddy boots, work gloves in my hand, and I listened. She was talking fast. Hushed. The way people talk when they're saying something they don't want overheard. And then I heard it. 4 words. He won't be long. Just like that. Casual. Matter of fact. He won't be long. She was talking about me. Her husband of 53 years. She was telling our son, our own son, that I wouldn't be around much longer. And from the context of the rest of the conversation, which I stood there and listened to for another full minute, she wasn't talking about a grocery run. She was talking about my life. She was talking about the house. The savings. What would be left when I was gone? And Gary was asking questions. Questions about accounts. About the will. About what she had already taken care of. I walked back outside. I sat down on the porch steps. And I thought about every year I had worked. Every sacrifice. Every time I said yes to the family and no to myself. Every "I'm fine," I'd said to Frank over a cup of coffee. And I realized right there on those steps, at 79 years old, that I had been so busy being the provider that I never stopped to ask whether the people I was providing for actually saw me as a person. Or just a means to an end. Now, here's where most men my age would have done one of 2 things. Either exploded. Or gone quiet and just let it happen. I did neither. Because I called Frank. I told him everything. Right there on the back porch, voice low, hands still shaking a little. Frank didn't say, "I told you so." He just listened. And then he said something I'll never forget. He said, "Walt, my Mary got sick and she was gone in 4 months. I never had time to fix anything. You still do. So the question is, what do you actually want?" I sat with that question for a long time. What did I want? I wanted to not be invisible anymore. I wanted to know that 50 years of work and sacrifice meant something. I wanted my daughter Carol, who lived in Portland and called me every Sunday, the one good thing in all this, to be protected. And I wanted Gary and Linda to understand that I was not a man who could be written off while he was still breathing. So I made an appointment. Not with a therapist. With an attorney. A very sharp one that Frank recommended, a woman named Patricia who specialized in estate planning and asset protection. I walked in there and I told her everything. And what she told me back changed everything. See, what Linda and Gary didn't know, what they had apparently forgotten, or never bothered to learn, was that the house we lived in was not in both our names. When we bought it in 1978, I put it in my name alone. It was a decision I made for mortgage purposes at the time, and we never changed it. I owned the house. Outright. My name only. Patricia also helped me discover something else. Over the years, I had maintained a separate retirement account, an old pension from my early manufacturing days, that Linda had never been on. It had grown quietly for decades. She didn't know the balance. She'd never asked? It was substantial. Patricia looked at me across her desk and said, "Mr. Walter, you have more leverage here than you realize." I went home that evening feeling something I hadn't felt in years. In control. Over the next 3 weeks, I moved carefully. Step 1, I updated my will. I had an old will that split everything evenly between Gary and Carol. I tore that up. The new will left the house and the bulk of my estate to Carol, with a specific written explanation of my reasoning that Patricia said was airtight. Gary would receive a symbolic amount, enough that he couldn't claim he was completely excluded, but not enough to make a dent. Step 2, I called Carol. Now, Carol didn't know any of this was happening. She and Linda had a polite but distant relationship. Carol had always been closer to me. I called her on a Sunday, like normal. But this time, after we caught up, I told her I needed to talk to her about something important. I told her everything. There was a long silence on the phone. And then Carol said, "Dad, I had a feeling something was wrong. I just didn't know how wrong." She cried a little. I did too, if I'm being honest. She wanted to fly out immediately. I told her not yet. I needed to finish what I was doing first. Step 3, I had a conversation with Linda. Not an explosion. Not an accusation. A quiet, deliberate conversation. I sat down at the kitchen table one evening and I told her that I was aware of the phone call. She went white. I told her that I wasn't angry, which wasn't entirely true, but stay with me. I told her that I understood she had concerns about the future. About finances. About what would happen. And I told her that I had taken care of it. I said, "Everything is arranged. You won't need to worry." She looked at me with this strange expression. Like she couldn't tell if I was bluffing. I wasn't. I then told her that I had spoken to an attorney, that the will had been updated, and that if she wanted to discuss the details further she was welcome to get her own legal counsel. She didn't say anything for almost a full minute. Then she said, "Gary was just trying to help plan ahead." I looked at her. I said, "Linda." I heard the conversation. More silence. Then, "What did you do, Walter?" And I said, "I did what I should have done a long time ago. I made sure the people who actually showed up for me are taken care of." I got up, poured myself a glass of water, and went to the living room to watch the evening news. Like nothing had happened, Gary called the next day. I let it go to voicemail. He called again. Then again. Then he showed up at the house. I answered the door. He looked agitated. Tiffany was in the car at the curb. I could see her from the porch. Gary said he needed to talk. I said, "Sure. Come in." He sat down across from me and immediately started in on how he was just trying to help Mom plan, and that he didn't mean anything by it, and that he hoped I wasn't reading too much into things. I let him talk. When he finished, I said, "Gary, you're my son. I love you. But you made a decision about my life while I was still living it. I need you to understand that I'm aware of that. And I need you to know that I responded accordingly." He asked what that meant. I told him the will had been revised. He asked why. I said, Because actions have consequences. And because Carol has called me every Sunday for 12 years and never once asked what she was getting. Gary stood up. He was angry. He said I was being unfair. That Linda needed someone looking out for her. I said, Linda is perfectly capable of looking out for herself. She's been doing it for years. I just hadn't noticed. He left. Tiffany peeled out of the driveway like she was in a movie. Now here's the part that really got me. About a week after all this, Patricia called with something unexpected. While reviewing the finances as part of the estate work, she found something. A credit card account I didn't recognize. In Linda's name only. With a balance that had been building for years. She had been moving small amounts of money into a separate account. Cash withdrawals here and there. Gift cards. Nothing huge on its own. But over a decade it added up to a number that made my chest tight. Patricia said it wasn't necessarily illegal. Marital finances are complicated. But she said it was relevant information. I sat with that for a long time. And here's the conclusion I came to. I wasn't going to expose Linda publicly. I wasn't going to drag her through court. I'm 82 years old. I don't have the energy for war. But I made sure Patricia accounted for every single dollar in the updated estate documents. It was all documented. All noted. All legally protected. If Linda ever challenged the will, which Patricia said was unlikely given how solid it was, the documentation would become part of the record. She would essentially have to explain herself to a judge. I suspect she knew this. Because after that initial confrontation, she went very quiet. No more hushed phone calls. No more dinners with Gary that I wasn't told about. She even started asking me if I wanted tea in the evenings. Like the last 30 years hadn't happened. Carol flew in the following month. I picked her up at the airport, and she hugged me for a long time. She's 48 now. Got her mother's eyes but her grandmother's backbone. She spent a week with us. She was polite to Linda. Cordial to the situation. But she and I had long talks in the evenings on the back porch, the same porch where I'd sat after overhearing that phone call. She told me that she had worried about me for years. That she'd seen the distance growing in the family. That she hadn't known how to bring it up without making things worse. I told her I wished she had. She said, Dad, you always seemed like you had it handled. You never let anything show. And I realized that was the problem. My whole life, I had prided myself on being steady. Unshakable. The man who handled things. But in trying never to be a burden, I had become invisible. I had made it so easy for everyone around me to forget I had needs, feelings, limits, because I never showed them. That was my part in all of this. I'm not saying what Linda and Gary did was my fault. It wasn't. But I understood, sitting there at 82 years old on my back porch with my daughter's hand over mine, that I had spent decades making myself small so everyone else could feel big. And that ended now. 6 months have passed since all of this. Here's where things stand. The house is mine. The will is updated. Patricia has everything documented and locked away. Carol calls 3 times a week now, not just on Sundays. Frank and I still do Thursday coffee. He told me he was proud of me. That means more than he probably knows. Gary has reached out a few times. Polite messages. Nothing deep. I respond, but I keep my distance. The trust isn't there anymore. Maybe it never was. Linda and I still live in the same house. That might surprise you. But at 82, upheaval isn't the goal. Clarity is. She knows what I know. She knows what I've done. She knows the documents exist. And something has shifted between us. A honesty of sorts. Not the warm honesty of love, but the cold, clear honesty of two people who finally see each other without the pretending. Some nights she'll sit down next to me and we'll watch television, and it almost feels normal. Other nights I look at her, and I still hear those 4 words. He won't be long. And I remind myself, I proved her wrong. I want to say something to you, whoever's watching this. Maybe you're older like me. Maybe you've given your whole life to people who took it for granted. Maybe you're younger and you're watching the warning signs in your own life. Here's what I know at 82. Time is the only thing that never comes back. I spent decades being the quiet man in the corner. The provider. The one who handled everything and asked for nothing. And I told myself that was strength. But strength isn't silence. Strength is knowing your worth. Protecting it. And refusing, even at 82, to let anyone treat your life like a countdown clock. I'm still here. I'm still standing. And for the first time in a very long time, I'm not fine. I'm better than fine. And if you've been making yourself invisible for people who don't deserve it, I hope this story gives you the nerve to do what I did. It's never too late. Not even at 82. If this story hit home, hit that like button. Subscribe if you want more stories like this. And drop a comment. I read every single one. See you next time.